Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Sunday and Valentine's Day episode of Curriculum of Fear. Not that this has anything to do with Valentine's Day, but that's just where we fall today. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, staying warm, and if you're with someone you love, you're very lucky. If you're not, I feel you. Not literally. That's a whole other thing. So what do I have here today? Well, I came across a set of videos that were posted by our friends at the National Association of Independent Schools, who, if you've been watching my Curriculum of Fear series, have seen on a number of occasions, because they are just like the sort of the TEDx of questionable ideas in education. And they posted a batch of videos that are segments from a webinar. Now, I wish I had access to the entire webinar. As far as I know, you only have access to that if you are a registered school official or can provide some kind of qualifications in that regard to their website or whatever. But on their YouTube channel, at least occasionally, they post segments of these things. And just from the thumbnails alone of these segments, I had a few questions about what they were talking about. It has something to do with the school board and racial diversity or something. I don't know. All I know is that the implication of it was caught my attention. So I thought I'd string those 3 short videos together into one file and take a look at them together. Now, I can't tell you for sure that they occur in chronological order, these segments, but they are split up as individual presentations. So that's all the preamble I've got for you on it. We'll take a look at it momentarily. But who is joining me on this special Sunday episode? Jaeger Pony, hello. Matt Barnes, hello. Quinn the Cultist, hello. Mr. Tickle Trunk, thanks so much for the dancing Dog Cat Fox. Oh, Dog Cat Fox. Scanner Daffley, hello. Mike R, hello. Check Your Logic, hello. Mike Savage, Blarg. The Magister, hello. Zalbla, hello. Ethan Robbins, hello. BG, hello. All right, so not much more for preamble on that. There's no bingo card or anything. I was just curious to see what is being advised of educators and so on in the wonderful world from the National Association of Independent Schools. So with that as introduction, such as it is, I will start off as usual with a couple of seconds for sound test. I think there's a little musical cue, and then we get into the actual segment. Yeah, there you go. And here we go. Okay, did you hear that little boop, 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 boop? You hear that? Let me know in the chat. And if my voice is a little froggy, it's because I'm just got up recently and I'm still kind of waking up. It is Sunday morning, and I'm only drinking water. It's too early for anything else. Sounds good, says Matt Barnes. Yes, says Cephas Wolf. I'll take yes as you can hear it. And Random American is not really here. Charles Gillian, hiya. All right, so NAIS webinars. Teach me, oh, teach me true. Okay, questions every board should ask. I'm guessing independent school board. And this is from Donna Oram, the NAIS president. Ooh, it's all very official.
For you trustees on the phone, I would suggest that you step back and ask yourself this question. In fact, this would be a great board retreat.
Okay, well, for those of you listening at home, we have a slide up. I'm going to read it off on the off chance that she doesn't, because sometimes in these presentations, they don't go one by one. But if I end up being redundant, oh well. Questions every board should ask. All right. If someone were to make assumptions about our school values based on our board composition, what would they be likely to think? Okay. Well, I guess my first question would be, what do you mean by composition? The implication of that question is interesting, isn't it? I'll just read it again for those in the cheap seats. If someone were to make assumptions about our school values based on our board composition, what would they be likely to think? I'll let that one marinate for a moment. The next one, how well are we cultivating a deeper understanding of the community that we serve and bringing their perspectives, needs, feedback, and priorities into our strategic boardroom discussions? Corporate speak. And next one, are we at risk of making decisions without fully understanding how these decisions may affect those we serve? I guess that's sort of a generic, ambiguous question, but okay. And the fourth one on the slide, if we were to make a deeper commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity, what would that mean for our mission, our work, and the people we serve? All right. Well, that first one was kind of a doozy, but let's see what our president of NAIS has to say.
To dig into all four of these questions. And they come to us from BoardSource. Many of you are familiar with BoardSource, an organization that supports the nonprofit community and good governance.
The nonprofit community and good governance by making people assess the values of the school board based on the composition of the board. Not for any other reason, not knowing anything about the individuals, I guess, on a personal level or by merit, but just looking at the quote unquote composition. You can extrapolate from that what the school's values are. I'm going to be fascinated if she goes deeper into that one. I'm really curious to know if she gives us any more details on that question and what that's supposed to mean. Because I think I know what it means, but I'd be making some assumptions. Speaking of assumptions. Thank you, Matt Barnes. Considering I live in a 99.99% white town and the board is all white, I've got to say, not too much. I don't know. I don't know what you're supposed to assume of a school's values based on board composition. That is such an interesting question to ask.
But just think, for a moment, take yourself out of your own lens for looking at your governance work and say, if somebody who knew nothing about the school looked at the makeup of your board, what assumptions would they make about the values of your board? Okay.
Please go deeper on this question. Please. I'm honestly dying to know what she means by this.
Also, as we start to look at these problems, if we are a board that is very, where we have brought on members that are very much like us, we don't actually have that voice at the table, and we're not understanding the community as a whole and what they need.
Okay, she's using very much couched language. The board members who are like us. What do you mean by like?
And what risks do we have if we make decisions without understanding who are those are going to be impacted by those decisions? How well will they be served or not served?
Okay, she completely dodged going deeper on that one, but okay. In the absence of any other information, I have to assume she's simply talking about skin color. I have to assume that are like us. So simply on the basis of the aesthetic, we have to be worried about someone might think about interpreting the values of our school based on the makeup of skin color. Never mind the individuals, never mind who they are or why they're there or what qualifies them to be there. We have to be worried about what someone might think of how we look and what they might assume then of our values, what they might assume of our values. That is what you have to be concerned about. Interesting.
And if we actually made a commitment as a board to DEIJ work, how would our work be different? How might our mission be different? How might we approach things differently?
I don't know. How might you approach things differently if you were overly concerned about what someone else might think about what your values are based on the skin color or appearance, at least, of the people on your board? What would you do differently? How would you address that concern?
But I think every board should have this conversation, because often, we think very tactically about how we grow the board, but we don't understand the impact that can have overall. And I would suggest to you, as the head board partnership, that you think about the importance of inclusive governance.
It all sounds like code, doesn't it? It all sounds very vague. It's not, and again, just my interpretation, but it sounds like she is advising people to say, do we have too many people of one particular color and or type on our board? And if we do, we should take strategic action to change that dynamic and hire on people who break the mold visibly. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I don't really see any other way of interpreting all of this.
Because inclusive governance will be everything in, I think, the world ahead of us. Because if people look at the school and they don't see themselves represented at the top, they don't see data or decision makers who look like them, how will that affect their view of the school? How will that affect what we prioritize as a board?
Right. So everybody's racist. And the only way to cure racism is to discriminate hiring or appointing people onto boards on the basis of race. We have to be very concerned about what people might think of us if our racial makeup is not acceptable. Never mind the individual, never mind personal merit, never mind just assessing people on who they are and not what they are. No. Even if we have a whole bunch of qualified people there, people that have worked their entire lives and are quality people, if they all look the same, or there's too much of one tone in there, we got to add people or kick people out or what? And what filter would you use to make those decisions? Well, you just said look. So there's really not a lot of room left to figure out what you're talking about.
And we know that diverse groups work much harder and actually have better outcomes. So,
do we know that? Really? Well, define diverse, because you're just talking about aesthetics. And last I checked, aesthetics do not equate to quality of person. But maybe in your world they do.
So, this is a job for the board that I would suggest to you should be your top priority moving forward.
All right. Well, that is the end of segment 1. So the top priority for a school board moving forward is to assess the racial or aesthetic makeup of your board members and then be afraid of what someone on the outside looking in might assume of your values based on the look of your board. That should be the real concern about who's on your board. Not whether they're qualified, not whether they know what they're doing, not whether they can bring anything to contribute to your school. No, you have to be worried about what someone else might think. Does this sound like high school thinking? Going to high school and you're one of those unfortunate kids, like maybe myself, who had to wear glasses and was kind of small at the time and kind of nervous and and you get that lesson from the after school specials that say, don't worry about what other people think, just be you, that kind of thing. Doesn't this sound like very ridiculous schoolyard type of concerns? No pun intended, but I just can't think of another analogy at present. Okay, well, there's segment 1, I guess. Let us move into segment 2. It's that little guitar strum at the end that makes me feel all comforted, you know. Everything else before that, it's like, ooh, boop, boop, beep, boop. And like technology, you know, it sort of speaks to the future or advancement, and they get that little guitar strum to bring you back. Oh, it's great. All right, next segment, building board leadership for racial equity. I have a feeling I'm about to have deja vu in overall message, but I guess we'll find out momentarily. Thank you so much again, Matt Barnes. Board is elected. You cannot make people run for it. I think we've all just received brain aids. Yeah, I understand. Boards are different, and I've come across this in different past videos, like regarding the NASDAQ and Goldman Sachs. When Goldman Sachs isn't going to do IPOs with any company that doesn't have a quote-unquote diverse board, where NASDAQ is going to require anyone listed in their index have a diverse board of one form or another. And as I've stated a zillion times in the past, I am not an equal opportunity lawyer. I'm not a civil rights lawyer. I do not know what the laws are in regards to the election of board members for businesses or other organizations. It's different than a hiring practice where you're hiring someone for their merit or the laws that protect people from being discriminated against on the basis of race and sex and so on. So I don't know what, if any, pitfalls there are legally when it comes to this kind of practice on boards. However, whatever the legal question, the overall principle that we supposedly operate in this country and we have championed and tried to evolve in ourselves over the last, well, I mean, couple hundred years, but at least certainly most significantly in the last 60 or 70, is that you don't discriminate people for opportunities in business or organizations or otherwise on the basis of race, on the basis of sex, on the basis of orientation, and so on. So the suggestion in the first segment that is what you should be thinking about, and the suggestion from the title card of this next segment, yeah, even if there might not be the same kind of legal entanglements as an actual employment situation, it still bugs me because it's this philosophy that is effectively driving these educators in their other practices, in the other parts of their jobs, in the school district itself, and who knows what else going on in the curriculum for the kids. So even if there's not a legal pitfall here, I think there is a dangerous precedent being set about the mindset of the people in charge of education in these instances. Oh, sorry. This is also this part of the presentation is from Caroline Blackwell, the National Association of Independent Schools Vice President of Equity and Justice. Because, you know, the school board is a justice system, I guess.
For boards, one of the things that this really means is to make sure that you're approaching racial equity work in a really systematic way.
A really systematic way. Okay, for those of you listening at home, the slide up right now is titled Building Board Leadership for Racial Equity. Okay. There are 6 bullet points. I will go over them now. Number 1, establish racial equity as a core value. Okay, and as we've known or learned time and time again, at least from my understanding, the word equity equates to, no pun intended, equality of outcome. Not equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. So establish racial equity as a core value. All right. Number 2, codify racial equity in the organization's strategic plan. So actually have it written down somewhere. Okay. Number 3, build and maintain a racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse board. Build and maintain a racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse board. So somewhere in your process for creating your board, you'll be filtering people on the basis of race, on the basis of ethnicity, and on the basis of culture, whatever that means. Okay, so qualifications of personal merit aside, if you don't meet our racial or ethnic or cultural standard, you don't qualify. Okay. Number 4, engage in regular board training and self-assessment. All right, that sounds vague. Number 5, create and define explicit board roles to support RDEI work. RDEI, it's a racial diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm assuming. Explicit board roles. So have the minders present to police everyone's interpretation of what diversity means. Okay. And last point, name and frame, quote unquote, by establishing a common language. Name and frame by establishing a common language. Okay, my imagination's going all over the place with that one, so I hope our speaker elaborates.
You can see here that making sure that racial equity is part of the core values of your institution is fundamental and critical.
Yeah, no, I'm getting that. I'm getting that you really want to make this important. I'm still at a loss as to what it has anything to do with someone's ability to do the job, but okay.
That we make sure that we're doing this work in a strategic way. This
work. I've done several videos, one in particular just called The Work on a curriculum of fear in the past. The work. It always sounds like it takes on a religious connotation. You know, we must do this hard work, this difficult work, the work, the work, the work. Sounds like a mission, doesn't it?
That we're laying out and building and maintaining a system that will allow for this work to be assessed regularly, to make sure that the work can be measured effectively.
So you want to have a systemic process by which you maintain equity on your board, racial equity, ethnic equity, and cultural equity. So you want to have systemic racism on your board. Okay.
We want to make sure that our board receives and our governance and our leadership members receive training so that they understand not only the language that we've been talking about today, but all of the components, the systemic components that relate to racism and its implications in our society.
How about the implication that having a systemic process by which to maintain racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse boards is actually systemic racism or ethnocentrism or ethnocism, whatever that word would be? My vocabulary fails me at the present. Do you hear what you are saying? Do you actually understand the implications of the slide you have in front of us? You want to fight systemic racism by having a system in place to ensure that your board is racially diverse. The absolute absence of self-awareness on that one. And this isn't the first time that I've come across it, but just in the same sentence, in the same statement, she says these things. It's quite remarkable.
It's important to also, as I said, to make sure that we're framing the challenges well, that we're discerning, and we'll talk about in a minute, between what is a problem that actually can be solved and what isn't. And one of the things that we don't always do, some of the boards that I've been involved with are still refining the definitions of what work is going on within board committees, what those specific roles are, so that board members are really clear about where their work begins and ends, and where the work of the leaders in the schools begin and end as well.
Oh, here comes. Ah, yes, the guitar strum. Okay, I'm not quite sure I understood that one. And the unfortunate thing about this, guys, is that obviously on either end of these segments, and in the middle, obviously, as well, we're probably going to miss some context because, unfortunately, I don't have access to the full webinar. I wish I did. Oh, I wish I did. Okay, so the lesson from the first segment, as far as I can tell, is you have to be worried about what people might think of you based on the makeup of skin colors and, or I suppose, ethnicities of the people. Like, if someone took a photograph of your board and showed it to someone else, you need to be concerned about what they might assume of your school's values based on that photograph. That's what I took from the first segment. From the second segment, you have to set up a system in your board election, whatever selection process, to ensure that there is racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity, which literally requires you to discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, and whatever culture is defined as. So again, you want to fight systemic racism by putting in a system that discriminates on the basis of race, at least as one factor. Okay, and we're on to segment number 3, the last segment. This may be a relatively short stream, guys, because there's not a lot of material here, but it does raise a whole bunch of questions. All right, here we go. Get ready for it. Yeah. Okay, defining a racial equity lens. Oh, okay. All right, I would love to, definitions are really, really important to me. Talking in the abstract as many times as these presentations often do, I really appreciate it when they get down to the nitty-gritty and tell us what they are talking about. And once again, this is going to be Caroline Blackwell, NAIS Vice President of Equity and Justice. All right, so define for us what a racial equity lens looks like.
So what is a racial equity lens?
I am dying to know. All right, so in case she doesn't go over all the details of the slide in front of us, and for those of you at home, the slide is titled Clarifying a Racial Equity Lens. Okay, there are 5 bullet points. Number 1, focus on race deliberately and extensively. I know it's going to sound a little bit blunt and maybe even sophomoric to say, but there's a word for people who spend all their time focusing on race. I know it might sound childish, but I really don't have anything else I can say to that one. Bullet point number 2, collect and analyze disaggregated data about race. Disaggregated data about race. Well, if you've collected it, you've aggregated it. So I have no idea what that one's supposed to mean. Number 3, adopt a growth mindset. Learn and teach about racial disparities, their origins, and impacts. Okay, the origins part is interesting to me because when you talk about racial disparities, I always think about the God of the Gaps theory of statistical analysis. There's a difference between these two totals, and there's one reason as to why this is so. That kind of thing, their origins. I don't know if that's the case. That's what comes to mind. Number 4, assess and solve problems through root cause analysis. Identify polarities in the RDEI field. Well, that first part, again, sounds like the God of the Gaps theory of statistical analysis, but again, I'm just assuming. Identify polarities in the RDEI field. I have no idea what that means. And lastly, name race explicitly and call attention to intersectionalities when describing and interpreting the dynamics of advantage and disadvantage. Name race explicitly and call attention to intersectionalities when describing and interpreting the dynamics of advantage and disadvantage. That sounds like you're assigning a quality of life outcomes to skin color. Again, I don't know how else to interpret it. Hopefully our speaker will give us some more information in the remaining 2 minutes and 13 seconds. All right.
And what does that actually mean?
I don't know.
Us?
Tell me.
It really means for us from the very beginning, as I said before, to take race into consideration intentionally and to do so extensively.
Okay, insert my broken record interpretation of that philosophy here.
One of the challenges in dealing with racism in our society
is perpetuating it through our supposed cure. Is that one of the problems? Tell me more about working against racism, and then explain to me that first bullet point.
As well as in our institutions, is that we have not done that. We have actually rejected oftentimes the notion and idea of seeing race.
Wait, the problem with fighting racism is that we have rejected and try not to see race. Oh, this is the colorblind argument, right? That somehow by setting race aside as a value factor in assessing a person, that in and of itself is racist. I'm backing up slightly. I need to hear that one again. I need to hear that one again because I'm mightily confused. I don't know if I went back far enough. Sorry.
Beginning, as I said before, to take race into consideration intentionally and to do so extensively.
Yes.
One of the challenges in dealing with racism in our society, as well as in our institutions, is that we have not done that. We have actually rejected oftentimes the notion and idea of seeing race.
One of the problems is that we have not focused on race intentionally and extensively. That is a problem. Well, let me get you a time machine and send you back to, I don't know, 1950s Alabama, where they focused very intentionally and extensively on race in educational institutions. Are you going to feel comfortable back there? Is that what you're asking for? You want schools to focus intentionally, extensively, and deliberately on race, because that's something that we're not doing. Am I hearing this right?
And addressing race in the ways, in all of the ways that it has differential impacts on.
Race is... Okay, I'm sorry. I cut her off. I'm going to back up a little bit.
An idea of seeing race and addressing race in the ways, in all of the ways that it has differential impacts on people.
Yeah, at this point, I don't know what I would say that wouldn't just be repeating myself, but okay.
We need to make sure that we collect and analyze disaggregated data.
I want to know what you mean by disaggregated data. I hope she explains that, because I think once you've collected it, unless and it's entirely possible, I may be an English major, but I'm not a walking thesaurus. Aggregate, or aggregate, past tense, form or group into a class or cluster, or to collect. As a verb, form or group. As a computing verb, collect. So if you've collected data about race, you've aggregated it. And I know I'm being very literal here, but that's what threw my brain off. I was like, how do you collect disaggregated data? I mean, and if it's about race, anyway.
And why I focus and why the focus on disaggregated data is because within groups, there's differences. And so we don't want to, or more to the point, we want to make sure that we are able to address in-group and intergroup differences.
Demographics. I have a feeling you're not actually talking about groups. But if you're thinking of demographics as groups and with in-group and out-group thinking, then you're thinking of demographics, you're thinking of skin colors, you're thinking of races as monoliths. Or at least that is what you are projecting here with your words. Is that how you approach the rest of the world and people in general? I have to wonder.
As well. And so that's really important, analyzing and gathering disaggregated data to support this process.
Collecting data to support this process? So you're not collecting data to find out if something is or is not so. Doesn't that sound like confirmation bias? I don't know. I'm just taking it as I take it in here.
Many of you have been practicing and teaching a growth mindset for a long time. The entire process of looking at this work through a racial equity lens is actually an exercise in a growth mindset. And so
growth minds, I don't know what that means. Going back to the bullet point, adopt a growth mindset, learn and teach about racial disparities, their origins and impacts. Okay, I wonder if she's going to define growth mindset. Thank you again, Matt Barnes. Say disaggregated data. Say it one more goddamn time. I was like, what? Collect disaggregated data. Like, I mean, I guess before you collect it, it would be disaggregated, I suppose. I mean, if you collect any data about anything prior to your collecting it, it was all disaggregated to begin with. So, sorry, my brain is having a literal syntax error trying to comprehend what the hell that statement means.
Holding on to that, you're not doing anything different from what you've already been doing. And in point of fact, you're drilling down into it in a way and in areas that will really benefit and improve your schools. One of the things that racial equity allows us to do is to clarify and the root causes of problems.
Clarify the root causes problems. What racial equity does is to clarify the root causes of problems by focusing deliberately and extensively on race in your schools. I have a notion that the one of the root causes of racism is, and just bear with me a second, is focusing deliberately and extensively on race, to elevate race to some kind of necessary, observable assessment factor in other people. Maybe I'm just crazy. I could be. But if your complaint is that schools are not focusing enough on race, and that's a problem, again, I'll try to find you a time machine to send you back to a time where that was part of the process.
And not just addressing symptoms of problems. And again, it allows for us to look at intersectionality, the ways in which race and gender, race and class, race and socioeconomic status, race and other dimensions of diversity interact to cause advantages or disadvantages within groups and across groups.
Here comes. Wow. Oh, such a comforting guitar strum. Well, unfortunately, guys, that is all I have for the segments of this webinar. That's all they've made available thus far. They have segments from other webinars in the past too, but it was these specific ones with their bullet points that I could see in the thumbnails that caught my attention. I will look to see if I can possibly find more, or, God forbid, the entirety of this webinar, but I don't know that I'll be able to. So on the chance that I can't, that is just a taste of what the National Association of Independent Schools is advising, I assume, independent schools regarding their processes, their board of directors, and so on. And while I didn't watch these ahead of time, while the stills gave me a hint, I'm still baffled. I continue to be baffled. Not just by this organization and what it's promoting, but just in general by education these days and what seems to be entirely and totally acceptable in the philosophy of people in charge of teaching children. In this last one here, our speaker was complaining that schools don't focus enough on race, that our institutions don't focus enough on race, that in and of itself is contributing to racism. And previous to that to fight systemic racism, you need to have a system in place to ensure racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity on your boards. Whenever I look at one of these videos, it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's a TEDx or a curriculum with fear, or anything, 9 times out of 10, I'm looking at someone who is a grown adult, who is a professional of some kind in their field, more often than not always, but either way. I don't assume for any particular reason that the people that I'm listening to are stupid, right? That they're completely unaware of their surroundings or something. They've gone through many years of life and education and experiences and everything else just like anybody else. So I don't think our speakers are dumb, but at the same time, then, if I don't think that they are dumb, but I hear entirely regressive and or contradictory statements coming out of their mouths, and they're saying it with such conviction and with such assurance of their rectitude, I really have to wonder, how do they move through the world? Just on a regular, everyday, walking down the sidewalk basis. How do they move through the world trying to hold those kind of disconnected notions in their minds? Systemic racism is bad. We need to establish a system to ensure racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity on our boards. What? Schools don't focus enough explicitly on racism, or sorry, race. Freudian slip on my part. Schools don't focus enough on race. That's contributing to racism. We need to have schools focus more on race, deliberately, intentionally, extensively. What? And yet these are people who are in charge of establishing the parameters for schools, education of children, and so on. They may be independent schools. They may not operate under the same rubric as public schools do, who get federal funding and so on. But that doesn't change the philosophy. I mean, you might as well say you have like a Catholic school, a private school. They focus on things that public schools can't because of the law. Okay. Right? If someone wants to send their kid to a private school that focuses on a particular aspect of life or society that otherwise would be verboten, at least in the way done so in a public school because of federal law, that's their choice. More and more from the videos I've watched and the multitude of individuals associated with NAIS and what they've been promoting, I'm thinking that these are private schools of, I mean, I'll put it bluntly, they are racist private schools that promote racial assessment as a virtue. They want the kids, they want the administrators, they want the entire structure of their organizations to be based around assessing people on the basis of race. And watching these 3 segments, admittedly in isolation and taken out of larger presentations, but I don't have anything else to go on. That seems to be good. That seems to be their goal. That seems to be something that they value. And yet they brand it as attempting to oppose racism. Part of me would love to sit down with one of these administrators, one of these officials, and just really have a out and out discussion, because I am confused. I am very confused as to how what they are promoting will achieve the goal they say they hold. Why it's okay to discriminate on the basis of race, as long as it's, I don't know, the races you prefer. What? So anyway, I could go on, but I've pretty much said my piece on these things. If you guys have any closing comments or observations or anything, I'll give a couple minutes here. Tag me, put @ScribeLight in your comments so I know that it's for me and for this part of the show. I have to keep things, formatted and official, and so I don't make any mistakes here. Yeah. I don't know. I keep focusing on this. Listen, here's the thing. I don't have any kids. I don't have a quote unquote horse in this race as far as like the value or the quality of education for children. So I can't even imagine what someone who's a parent with kids in school would think about this, even if it's not a school that their kid's going to. But it still disturbs the hell out of me, because this is where things start, right? We joke about it on Lords of the Night, Jim Jones. We did a whole bunch of talks early on in the show talking about Jim Jones and cults and things. But the one thing that remains true, regardless if you're talking about something insidious or something positive, is that it all starts in your youthful years. A lot of the things that you end up doing or the ways you end up thinking going forward in life obviously do start in those formative years. And so when I see things like this, when I see grown adults, administrators in schools or in business or whatever, encouraging what sure sounds to me like benevolent racism as a cornerstone of education, and thinking about what these kids are going to grow up to either think and or do and or implement on their own in the rest of society, it's a very disturbing concept. If this is what is being sold to us and sold to children and sold to parents as a good thing. So that's why I pay attention to this from time to time. Thank you again, Matt Barnes. These people aren't dumb, but they spend a lot of time thinking too hard about these things. Not only do they spend a lot of time thinking too hard about it, but they elevate it to a point of, virtue. Like, it is a good thing to focus on race in a school. It is a good thing to assess people for positions in our administration on the basis of race. We have to think about race extensively so we can fight systemic racism. Mr. Jiggletrunk says, I'd be curious if this sort of stuff were in more conservative school boards, see where this stuff is widespread. Some stats I've read have the stuff being taught to grade schoolers. Well, I'm again, and just self-promotion here, but also as just a matter of fact, if you go through my playlist for Curriculum of Fear, which will be, for those of you in the future, linked at the end of the video, I have more than a few examples of this kind of thinking, or shades of it, no pun intended, but I'll take it, in elementary schools, preschools, all the way up through high school and college. There's no level of education in different places that this doesn't inevitably end up touching, that I've found, And I'm not saying it happens in every school or anything, but it's not limited to, high school or something else. It's all the way down at the beginning. There was I think it was a PBS segment I did on a previous Curriculum of Fear, where they were at literal preschools teaching kids about race and to notice race and so on and so forth. And it's the most mentally incoherent thing you can imagine, just listening to these grown adults, these grown teachers trying to sell to the reporter that what they are doing isn't just absolutely insidious. But moving on. Spittle buggies, you can deaggregate data, but you can't diss it. But data doesn't get the joke. I don't know if that's a Star Trek reference or if I'm just too obtuse for my own good. Ethan Robbins, I am a sophomore in high school and I find this shit ridiculous. Well, yeah, like I say, this is just me looking at this. Again, this is all these segments are taken out of a larger presentation. If there is some additional context on either side of this that somehow mitigates what is being implied there, I couldn't tell you. And I provided links to the original videos below, but I haven't edited anything from them. I've just linked them together into one file. So if you want to watch them yourself, by all means. Like I say, if I can find the whole thing, granted that these all come from the same webinar, I don't know if they all do. I will attempt to, but yeah. But even if these are out of context, if you look at previous videos either on my channel or just go to NAIS's YouTube channel and just sift through some of their other videos. There's a whole lot of stuff there that I've never touched, but I've looked at before. And not even that. If you go into YouTube and just type in diverse classroom or I don't know, social justice education, something like that. It's all over the place. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised by that at this stage of the game, but I mean, this stuff was just posted in the last week. This isn't stuff from years ago or something. This is going on right now. Resolute Germ, Scribelight, you still have a horse in this. We all see the kids getting dumber and dumber, and those idiots are going to be running things someday. Yeah, and and also as I read that, I also think about sort of the cliche of any generation moving one to the other. These kids today, that kind of stuff. And maybe there's some comedy to be had in some instances of that, but when you're talking about this, I don't think this is and I'm not saying that you were saying it was a joke, but my mind immediately goes to the self-check of maybe I'm just an old fuddy-duddy now. Right? Maybe I'm just being a cynical old person, even though I'm barely 40 now, looking back and just being some kind of fuddy-duddy, of crotchety, whatever, these kids today. I don't think I'm being that way. I of course, I'm my own worst witness. But when our speaker there talked about how schools aren't focusing enough on race these days, and that's a problem. Well, what would her alternative be? What would the ideal school look like in her mind, I wonder? What procedures, what visible, tangible actions would be taken in the perfect school that focuses on race extensively and deliberately? I would love to know what that image looks like. Because when I think of a school that focuses on race extensively and deliberately, I'm thinking of George Wallace. I'm thinking about the fight for integration and everything that was the way it was before that started. I can't get that image out of my mind when I hear her talking about wanting institutions to focus extensively and deliberately on race. Where else can that mindset lead but backwards? I don't know. I would love to hear her explanation. Mr. Tickletrunk, Scribelight, when I was taught about race in grade school, it was it was about us all being the same on the inside, same when you were a kid. I'd imagine us close in the same age. We didn't, I have tried to think back as to what, if anything, was explained to me about race in school. And to the best of my recollection, save to the point where we got to history class in basic elementary school or junior high and high school, and talking about the civil rights movement and stuff like that, it never came up. I am dying, not even dying, but I should say I'm clawing at my memory to think of a time where I was told anything about race, because I went to school with kids of all types. I had friends who were in the playground who were black, who were Asian. It didn't even come up. It wasn't even a thought to me. I didn't even question it or think of something was different or inherently made someone bad or I don't know. It's difficult for me to articulate because it was just a non-feature in my growing up. So I can't think of an instance where I could tell you when it was relevant. To me, it never was. I can't speak for anybody else, obviously, but in my growing up, it was never something that I was either worried about or was told about. My parents never, like I say, my brain reaches a blank point when trying to answer that question because it was just not an issue. Not for me. I didn't have any thoughts one way or the other. It was just another kid in my class. As far as I understood it, if I have to put some kind of assessment on it, the color of your skin was as relevant as the color of your eyes, the color of your hair. You know, that was it. So for me, it was never a factor of assessment or thinking about it or anything else. And I do remember growing up and watching, as I was young, the videos of what happened in the South and during the Civil Rights Movement, and you know the fire hoses and pictures of lynching and everything. I just remember being horrified that people used to be that way. That was my thought, that things used to be that way. And you see Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, the I Have a Dream speech. And in my, naive but impressionable little mind, that was my understanding of how we were now. That all of that was old, useless thinking. That we had moved beyond that, or that the intention was to move further beyond that day by day, bit by bit. Now, of course, as I grew up and became more cynical, I understand that it'll never be gone. There will always be prejudice. There will always be discrimination of one sort or another. Human beings are like that. We don't have laws in place because people are perfect. We have laws in place because they are a confession of the inherent fallacies of human beings. We have to put it down in ink to make sure we remind ourselves what we already know about the human condition. Laws are confessions of past bad behavior and a promise that we're going to work to do better. So yeah, sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's the best I've got. Spittlebuggies, math major and data compilation joke. Okay, well, I'm an English major, so I can't even understand your language. But with that, everyone, I'm going to call it here. Brief stream, relatively, I guess. Oh, it came in just under an hour. But I just wanted to go over these little segments and see what they had to say. Because curiosity, as you know, yeah. I'll let your mind finish that old saying. Because my brain has just left me. Something about a cat. Dog, cat, fox? Wowie, wow, wow. Okay. Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this one. Appreciate it. Hope you learned something, perhaps, or maybe you got a little irritated on the other side. If you'd like to hear more from me or Satsu 2 Cents, you can find the two of us tomorrow night, Monday night, on Satsu 2 Cents' channel at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for The Lords of the Night, where Satsu and I will go over the news of the day, news stories that you submit, what we've been up to on the internet, and then your questions and comments. Everyone, I hope you are all safe, well, and in this part of the year, warm. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.